Hello, my friends, and welcome. Nice to see you all again. I want to talk to you a little bit about disappointment. In an interesting kind of way, my life has been studded with disappointment, and some of which were rather significant kind of events. And it kind of started in Vietnam when I was flying off an aircraft carrier there in the late 1960s. And in the aircraft carrier, which if you're in the air wing, before you go on a mission, you go down to the intelligence space, air intelligence, and you get briefed about what your mission's going to be and what the latest intelligence, and are they going to shoot you down or not? Are they going to shoot at you? Whatever. And then when you finish, when you come back, you debrief and you say, well, this is what I saw, or this is what I didn't see, and so on. And in the intelligence space, there was a clipboard hanging on the wall. They don't call them walls on ships, but that's what it was. And it was the top secret message board. And the top secret, and I had a top secret clearance, and so anybody could go in there and read it. But I think I was probably one of the only officers in the air wing that literally went down every day, and I'd flip through the top secret message board to see what they were saying. And there were all kinds of messages about different kinds of things. But the things that were most interesting to me at the time was that you could literally, if you remember this at all, the situation back then, Henry Kissinger was the national security advisor. And Kissinger was literally running the war from the White House, and he was designating targets from the White House, saying, bomb this, bomb that, do this, and so on. And we had, and so I could see this direct relationship between what Henry Kissinger was saying and what was going to happen on my ship to my friends 2 days later. I'd have them come to me. We were in the jamming business. We'd jam the enemy radars. And I literally had one of my buddies come to me one day and said, John, you got to help me do everything you can, because in 2 days, we're just going to get hosed. We're going in on us middle of the night by a single airplane. And anyway. And they had rules of engagement. They briefed us all in the air wing at the beginning so that everybody understood. The rules of engagement are: you cannot bomb the railroads that come down from China. You say to yourself, wait a second, this is a war and they're moving all of this material on the railroads from China, and they're telling us we can't bomb that. And then they said they can't bomb any of the port facilities or any of the ships or anything in Haiphong Harbor. And you don't have to be very smart to say, well, what in the world is going on here? Because all this stuff by ship are coming into Haiphong Harbor. And then they said you can't bomb, you can't hit the dikes around the rice paddies. And you say, wait a second. If I let all the water out of the dikes, then the rice doesn't grow and the people can't eat and the war ends, right? But they wouldn't let you do that. And it was very clear for this young junior grade lieutenant that this thing was not getting played straight in any of the kind of conventional terms that you thought it was, that you thought it was. And it was a very interesting kind of shock, because after all, you're in there exposing yourself, doing dangerous work, potentially dying every day. I used to sit on the end of the catapult getting ready to launch and close my eyes and say, is this the day I die? Yeah, it was, it was right there in front of you and everything. And then to kind of determine that the game was rigged, that was really kind of problematic for me. And it started me off on this whole kind of new direction that was going in another way. And that was the kind of the second biggest kind of epiphany that showed up in my life, because I remember I went to college in this Christian, little small Christian college down in Arkansas. And my whole background had been conservative religion and Protestantism. And, everybody else was going to hell and what didn't believe the way we believed. And one day, I don't know, I might have been a junior or something like that. Jesse Jackson was just kind of getting his start and making a name, and he was on the news. And he said, I don't believe all the Chinese are going to hell because some white missionary didn't go over there and talk to them. And I heard that and said, you're right. The whole thing, the stuff doesn't work. That the system is torqued. It isn't like they told me it was. And I got a whole lot of personal stories about how the Navy cured me of a lot of the things that I had been taught when I was younger, but we won't talk about that today. But anyway, so I get in the Navy, and you start figuring out, wow, this thing is really kind of screwy. And I went off and at one time, and I owned an advertising agency, and I had a partner, and we had built a rather robust kind of little business in Chicago. And one day he came in and says, I'm quitting. And what I found out the next day was that he had taken our largest client with him and gone off somewhere else. And suddenly, just out of the blue, all of those relationships that you'd had and all the trust that you had built there and the assumptions you had made just kind of evaporated and aggravated by the fact that the economics suddenly changed like crazy, and you had to lay people off and all kinds of very hard things to do just because you had this personal relationship, this assumptions that you'd made about people and somebody, and they do things that I would never do. My wife says that's your problem. You think everybody's going to act like you do. So anyway, that was really tough. I remember that in my head I had pain going running around in circles. It's like you had some kind of a tiara or something on top of your head, and it was going around. And it was very traumatic for me at the time. And then one day, a couple of years later, after I'd kind of built the business up again a little bit more, my salesman came to me one day and said, I sold that big piece of business, $500,000 to this magazine, New Age magazine, that was being published up in north of Boston. And we had delivered everything. I was in the direct mail business, and so I came up with the idea that before I came up with the idea, when you were in the direct mail business, as every magazine was, what you had to do is you had to, write your own you had to find a copywriter, you had to have somebody design a mail package, you had to get a letter shop you had to get a list broker to do the mailing list and put them together. You had to design the whole thing, get a graphic designer, you had to print all of the pieces, you had to make the envelopes, you had to stuff the envelopes, you had to put the labels on the envelopes, and you had to haul it to the post office and get it all done. All of those were separate things, typically done by separate companies. And so there was usually in a big magazine one person who did nothing but manage all of that kind of stuff. And I came up with the idea that I can do all of that and I can cut the price on this whole thing by, I don't know, 20% or something like that, save my client a lot of money and make a good bid on the sale. So biggest client I ever had $500,000. We delivered all this stuff, literally a railroad box car full of paper that we had bought and that running through the printing to the lithographers at the printing company. And he came in and said, they just told me that they can't pay their bill, that they don't have any money. And it was extraordinary. I'd never had anything like that happen to me before. And I get on an airplane, go out and see this guy, who, by the way, was John Kerry's brother-in-law. Right, brother-in-law. He introduced me to John Kerry one time. I went to Kerry's office and said hi. Anyway, but I go out there and he says, well, we can give you, a nickel on a dollar. We can give you 5% of what. And it was horrible for a little business because I was obligated to the printers and the letter shop and to the list brokers and to the graphic artists and all of those kinds of things. He wasn't obligated, I was. And I couldn't walk away from those guys. I'd made a deal with all of them. It didn't make any difference what my client does. And so I worked out and I paid them overtime. I paid them all. But what I had to do was essentially shut down the business, sell the building that we were in. And it was a giant economic problem. And it completely kind of blew me out of the water. It kind of ended that business as it existed. And I'll come back and tell you then what happened. But it was a big deal. Because you invest yourself heavily in these things if you run a business, and certainly if you start a business and you have all these relationships, these emotional relationships, particularly with your employees. So then but it was in the middle of all of that where I in a very interesting kind of way, a presidential campaign just dropped into my lap. I was interested in other things about the military and national security things, and it turns out that this guy from Colorado, Gary Hart, who I found out later was a senator, right? I didn't know who he was, but it was very interested in military reform things, how to reform the military. So I got in, said, I got some ideas and started to go to Washington. I had a client in Washington. I had clients all over the country. And so I went to Washington every month. And so I started a relationship there. And then this building that I ultimately had to sell, it was 2 floors and we had some space at the top. And they came to me and said, well, Hart's, running for president and we need an Illinois office for Gary Hart for president, and we don't have any space. I said, I got some space up on the second floor. You can run it from up there. And so we got all these kids running up there, carrying on. And then one day they come to me and say, we need to have a state chairman. Would you be the state chairman? I didn't know anything about politics. I was just being nice and helpful to these guys because I wanted to go change the military. And they said, I said, my initial reaction was that's stupid. Why would I ever get into politics? And then I said, wait a second, that doesn't happen, right? You get a chance to play in a high level, and I was one of 12 people that ran the whole country on the thing. So I got involved in that, and let me tell you, I found myself in the middle of Chicago politics. And if you know anything about politics in this country, that was Richard Daley and the machine, the Democratic machine. And here I'd been kind of a whatever. I wasn't, I don't guess I was a Republican, and then, but I didn't know kind of who I was, more or less. But in Chicago, there's only one game. There is no, there are no Republicans. It's just Democrats. And if you're going to play, you got to play with these guys. And it, it was wild and crazy and interesting. We went to the national convention. We did all kinds of wonderful, interesting things. But I got a picture on my wall standing with one of those at the national convention with one of those signs, those vertical signs that say Illinois on it, where each one of the delegations is. And I'm standing there in the middle, and there's somebody's up in front taking a picture down, and I'm surrounded by all these Pauls from Illinois and Chicago. Danny Rostenkowski, you probably don't remember his name, but he was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the House at the time. He was a very extremely powerful, influential guy, and a whole bunch of other people. The mayor, Chicago, the head chairman of the Illinois Democratic Party. And I've got it in the hallway going down toward the bathroom, because when I look at it now, I can count about 5 of those guys all went to prison because that was just, and I had gone into that whole situation. This kind of naive kid from Nebraska that was coming out of this Christian thing, and they all told me what was right and what was wrong. You're right. And you get into you want to play in Chicago in politics. There's no right and wrong. There's different degrees of wrong, kind of. It's just gray all over the place. And it just torqued my whole notion of how things work, because they told me all my life that this is what you can do and what you can't. This is right and this is wrong. And yet here I'm thrown into this situation, and this stuff is all there's there's no metric at the below other than your self-interest. I mean, that's how I was operating in that kind of thing. And that's when I was going to Washington, then I found out when I'd grown up, there were these 2 senators from Nebraska, Roman Hruska and Carl Curtis. And when I'd grown up, they were all these icons, right? Everybody, senators. And you always thought of them as kind of wonderful guys. And you come over here and you get in the middle of it, and you find out, God, so they're dirt bags. I don't remember the details of the thing, but anyway, you just keep backing up saying, wow, all of these ideas and these things that I thought were right and that were good, just don't do it. And then, I started getting into this new agey kind of stuff. In fact, I learned about it from New Age magazine, which blew my little business out of the water. I didn't know anything about it, and I'd sit down with him and say, "What is this about?" And and he'd explain it to me, and so I started to kind of explore person being kind of, and I was very much kind of an explorer looking into all these things and how they all work. And I got to where I had a knowledge of and kind of a familiarity with, and in some cases relationships with some lots of people who at that time, everybody in that sector that we kind of all of transited. Uh, I knew most of the folks, and I remember one person in particular who's every one of you would know. I've spent time with him in Mexico and other places, and I remember back when they were doing cassette tapes, I bought his tapes and listened to them over and over again, and they were wonderfully helpful. I mean, extraordinary helpful. And I thought the world of the guy. I was very impressed. And then I found out one day that he kind of liked to go to strip clubs and things and stuff like that on the side. Not many people knew that, but and it just boom. And you say, wait a second, wait a second. You're saying all these wonderful things, and they were very helpful to me. And it just blew up, at the end. It was like a firecracker that goes up and then goes, a Roman candle or a rocket. And then I was writing for a magazine, well-known magazine that most of you would recognize. And I had a column for the magazine, and it was headed by a individual who was well-known. And then I find out one day that he's beating and abusing and sexually molesting and other kinds of stuff, some of his staff. And you go, what? What is this? I learned all these things, and it was all wonderful. And then you get to the place, and again, it blows up in your face. So, I just re-engaged and started looking for the next guy. They turn out mostly to be guys. And so I had this one friend who, again, is a name that many of you would know, certainly what he talked about. And he was a really good friend of mine. And I traveled around with him and did workshops with him and been in my house many times. And then I found out he was keeping a slave. Yeah, like a really slave. He had this South African woman who had come over, and he had told her he'd get her a green card or some other kind of thing. He took her passport and wouldn't give it to her, and kept her in bondage for 8 or 10, 12 years. And I know because I kind of rescued her. I sent somebody down and I literally said, you stand on this corner at this time, and there's a car going to come by, and they're going to grab you and take you away from all this. And we brought her up here and tried to help her. And but you go, oh, how in the frickin' world is that? How incongruous is that? And so, and about that time, so I'm starting looking around all over the place and seeing and I got interested in Sai Baba. Remember Sai Baba over in India? Sai Baba could do all these things and magic and do miracles, and vibhuti, which is this ash that would show up in things. And I read all about him and everything because I'm trying to figure out where's the director, who's the guy, what's the direction through all of this kind of stuff. And so talked Diane into going to India. Did she not want to go to India? But she went to India, and it turned out she was a lot more interesting than she thought. But anyway, I went to see the Sai Baba. They went somewhere else while we were a couple of couples. And got up at 4 in the morning to go sit out there with 3,000 people on the ground, waiting for the guy to come out and, I don't know, do whatever he did. But I was really thought that he was a pretty wonderful guy. And then you find out he likes little boys. And one of the guys, one of the families that was the closest to him writes a book, and it starts to explain one after another about all this stuff that he was doing. And then you find out that, I don't know, he lost his touch or something, but he couldn't just manifest things like he had been. And so now there's movies of him reaching underneath his rear end and pulling stuff out and showing it. And, and you go, what in the world? Is there no truth, or, is there nobody with integrity in the middle of all of this kind of stuff? So then I go over and I hear about this guy who's in India. He says he's an avatar, and he's God that has come down on this earth, and his job is to facilitate this transition to a new world and a new human. Well, that's my song, right? That's what I'm doing. And so I try, I've been beat up and burned a couple of times enough in the past so that I really do my homework, and I go over to England and go up and spend a day and a half with a guy who's his representative. This avatar is representative in the UK, to ask him every hard question I could ask. And yeah, he says, yeah, he's good. He's right. And so I get myself invited to go over there. And so I go over, and it's amazing. It's just amazing. I mean, I'd sit down, we'd have meditations in the evening. I mean, this is like serious meditation stuff. This is not little guided meditation things that people do. And you'd be in a different kind of space. And and remember that they sent one guy over. They had these kind of monks. And they sent one guy over, and they were going to have a meditation where we hugged each other, and everybody'd go up there and they'd close their eyes and bow their head. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to look at this guy. And so I go up there and I sit there and I look at him, and God, tears start coming out of his eyes and out of my eyes. And I know he's an old friend of mine from somewhere, the dear friend. And I'd never seen anything, and he wipes the tears off of my eyes. And, and you go, wait a second, this is something else. And then this guy, Sai Baba, not Sai Baba, but Bhagwan, wants me to come over and meet him. And I sit down and talk to him for most of an hour, and we get to the end, and he says, what can I do for you? And I don't remember what I said. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll let you see the future like I see the future. I said, I'm for that. Go. So come back over here. So I buy another airplane ticket and go over there for a week. And these guys work on me, and they opened my heart chakra, and I would have thought I was having a heart attack if I didn't know what they were doing. And I could sit there literally, and I could connect with him and with his wife and with my wife and with my kid. And for this engineer, I mean, it was wild and crazy kind of stuff. So I really thought he was it. And they asked me if I'll go run around the country, around the world and open for his number one kind of guy who was the good English speaking monk who would then do teachings for 2 days. And so I flew on airplanes all over the place and, do my futures thing at the beginning. And he'd come after me. I mean, I really believed in it. I could feel the blessing. I could feel the energy, the Diksha blessing they were talking about oneness. And then his whole organization kind of blows up. His English speaking guys are telling him, we got to kind of tune the message for the English folks because you see, they don't believe that you're God. And if you keep saying you're God, then what we have is a really hard time to figure that. So we can just, slightly change the message for them and say you're, a messenger from God or some other kind of thing. And he didn't like that idea. He called all of these monks. He had about 180 of them or something like that. These kids who had given their life to him into a room and said, okay, yeah, we'll do this. This is a good idea. We'll do it. So all of you who are interested in being with this group that does the English things and stuff, stand up. And, some of them all got all excited and stood up and said, yeah, yeah. He said, all right, now all of you get out of here and never come back. This was God talking. It just destroyed their lives. I watched it happen. And I mean, these are people whose families had given up their kids because they thought this guy was God. And now he acts like some petulant little kid who's angry because they don't, people don't give him enough respect or some other kind of thing. Man, this stuff just kept going and just kept going. I had a friend of mine who was a channel, an extraordinary guy who could tune in to anybody, anywhere. I used him, I once asked him to tune into Tesla to help us figure out the answer to some technical problem we had. Tesla gave us the answer. And I introduced him to a lot of my friends. And so he was quite successful. And some of them paid him good amounts of money because he had been so helpful to them. And then I find out he's stealing from me and he likes pornography and other stuff. And the whole thing comes apart. And last I heard, he was homeless on the streets in Las Vegas. And I've left out a number of other kind of experiences like that. But my life has just been these kind of searching things, looking. I took the position. It was implicit at the beginning, and then it became rather explicit about the whole thing that said if somebody shows up in my life, they came for a reason, and my job is to figure out the reason, and it's not to summarily dismiss them and get rid of them because I don't like the color of the shirt they're wearing or whatever, And so I was very open with a lot of all of these people, because I was really looking for truth. I was looking for the essence, the little things that other people didn't know, the truth that was coming in from the outside, out on the fringy edge, right? It's not in the center where it's status quo and everybody understands it. It's out, the new stuff is all coming in from the outside. So you got to go out to the edges and you got to play in those kinds of spaces, and you got to, but it just kept blowing up on me. I mean, so much so people, some relatively rather close to me, starts making fun of me, about see what you did. You thought he was somebody. What it caused me to do finally is sit down and think about what in the world was going on here. Everybody that I really thought was really good, that I really put a lot of trust into and invested a lot of time and in some cases a goodly amount of money. Turns out just to be a human like everybody else. I did the same thing with Obama. When Obama first showed up, I read all of his books and stuff and said, this is a good man. And this is a guy who could really make a difference in this place. So I really got behind and was trying to be rather helpful in the whole thing. And then 6 months, he just blew up. He just went nuts. He's doing worse things than the guys before him. He's sending drones in and killing people. And so, give me a list. Yeah, that one, that one, that one. And so we go out and we'll kill them, and if he went after the whistleblowers more than anybody else. And you say, what in the world happened? Here I thought that this guy was a good guy. And then you find out, no, I don't know whether they compromised him, whether they got him, whether they had him before, whether they got him after he got into the White House or something, maybe a little of both. But in any case, you have to put your trust into all of these things as as you work your way through the whole process, this middle of your life. And you say, what in the world is that all about? I'm going to be 80 in about 10 days. Well, that's a little bit more than that, 3 weeks, something like that. And so I've had a chance to do a lot of things all over this world and lots of different situations and meet a lot of people that are leaders and well known in their areas. Both in the religion area, one of the stories I didn't tell you is I ran a religious organization that was run that my father started. That was in the publishing business. And published books and tapes and other kinds of things. And I went and we did it all through the Christian Booksellers Association, which, if you've never heard of them, that's too bad, because they're the largest seller of books in the country, probably in the world, religious books. They're not on the New York Times bestseller list. They sell more than anything else. And so I'd go to the convention and go through and walk through them all and all the booths and all the stuff and the Jesus junk that they're telling. Little comforter for your dog that says Jesus loves me on the side, stupid stuff, funny stuff. Anyway, and I'm in Denver, and just a week earlier, I'd been to the Christian Booksellers Associations, and then I go say, the ABA, the American Booksellers Association, has a convention going on downtown Denver, and I got a day free. I'm going to go down there. So I go down and I go into the American Booksellers Association, and I start walking around. And I said, wait a second. This is the same thing as where I just came from. They're all hustling. They're all selling. I mean, it was just like the Christian booksellers. I remember walking into the last Christian bookseller convention that there was, and I ran into Roy Rogers. Remember Roy Rogers? I knew him a little bit and chatted with him a little bit. He had all of his guns and his hat, all of his things. And why was he all dressed up and doing that? Because he was going to his publisher's place and they were going to sell books. And he was one of the guys, and all of the heroes, all of the heroes of Christendom were there. And You go to the American Booksellers Association, and it's the same thing. And it just put a knife into the middle of this whole Christianity kind of thing that had still resident inside of me, and said, wait a second, it's these ideas, these things that they've been telling you that you believed in are just not what they purport to be. And like I say, so I'm at a place where I kind of looking back, this is not a new idea because I figured this out earlier, but I said, how does this work? How does this work? You know, how do all these people with names and influence and stuff, how does that kind of interface with your life? I'll tell you what I come to believe is that this life presents us, puts out their hand on a platter and says, try that. And the as I suggested to you earlier, it's an opportunity. Everything is an opportunity. And the question is, what do you extract from that experience? And it is not that all of it is true, but there's something in the middle of each one of those experiences that's for you to learn in the whole thing. And so it's so that it switches the whole thing, because I went through most of these things thinking that this was the game, that the game was that I was supposed to learn things from this guy and whatever, and I was trying to get better in my life and elevate my consciousness and whatever, and all these kinds of things. And that somewhere out there was somebody or some kind of book or some kind of thing or course that was the one that was going to tell me what the truth was. And that was the essence of the evolutionary process. You reached out and found, you know, the amount of truth at the next time. It's not like that. It's like you've got to extract out of the multitude of experiences that are presented to you. You've got to look at them and say, what am I supposed to learn out of this one? It's this arm's length kind of thing that rather than saying that this is real and they're really messing with me and they took my money and they whatever that on, you all know, you know, most of you know this, you've heard this, that says that you're supposed to learn something in all of the experiences that come to you, but it's a real interesting mind shift that walks you away from the literal experience when your first thought is, what am I supposed to learn here? And it's not like, why did he say that? And you know, what are they trying to do? Steal my money or whatever? It changes the whole thing. And so you don't get this emotional attachment that you do if you think that you're talking to God or, you know, whoever, or God's representative or some other kind of thing. I don't know how this works with aliens or others. I don't know. But I can, what I do for me, what I can tell you is that what you find out is that it's all human, all over the place. And some people, very few, are really crystal clear inside, squeaky clean and consistent and have just guaranteed integrity. I can count on one hand and have some fingers left over to tell you the number of people that I know that I would think function at that level, that would never lie to you and will, you know, always stand up and do what's the right thing to do. but everybody else you're supposed to learn stuff from them, and you're supposed to learn from the experiences. And I may not have effectively communicated it, but it really does change your outlook when you get to the place where you look at things in that way. You unencumber the whole thing, and it becomes this it switches over to be this kind of interesting analytical thing that says, how do I what do I learn here? How do I not respond the way I responded in the past? How do I what's the good stuff that's supposed to come out of all of this? Now, I would suggest that in the days and the months and the years ahead, we are all going to be confronted with extraordinary experiences that have the distinct potential of being very disruptive and very threatening and very emotionally taxing. And, in some cases, it could be existential in terms of who your senses, who you are, and what, and and those around you that you love, and all these kinds of things. And the way that I found, that I believe, the way that works for me, is that again, you step yourself back and you say, so they're going to start a nuclear war, huh? So now what am I supposed to do? What's the best thing to do? What am I going to learn from this? How do you do this? And and you start to say, what is this about for me? This is not about the world and the country and Donald Trump and Joe Biden and whatever, that kind of stuff. It's kind of like, this is about me and my progression and my process, and how this stuff is all kind of being presented to me. And the question is, how do you kind of raise yourself above the fray against the everyday kind of stuff going on? And that seems to me to be about the only way that I know of to kind of deal with the kind of uncertainty and big change that seems to be coming downstream. This is about thinking about what can you learn from it? What can you take away from it? How are you supposed to be differently? Who are you supposed to be different in the whole thing?